Hello, my name is Drew Clemens. I'm Delivery Director at Sparkbox. That essentially means that I work with all of our project teams that are building and designing, managing projects for our clients, everything it takes to deliver. I've been with Sparkbox for a little over 11 years. I have a background in design, some UX, a whole lot of project management. But we're not really here to talk about me. We're not even really here to talk about Sparkbox. We're here to talk about you. We're here to talk about digital products. But before we get into that, I want to share a little bit about where we're coming from. Over the last 10 plus years, we've been working with clients in a variety of industries all over the world. We've worked with them through the rise of digital transformation, somewhat of a stabilization in browser standards. We've seen websites go from desktop to mobile, the embracing of responsive web design. We've watched this meteoric rise of software as a service and the growth of e-commerce to the point of something like 15% of retail sales now. We've been working with folks just like you, people in charge of their digital products. And we're humble enough to know that we don't have all the answers. We truly don't. Nobody knows your business like you do. But we've learned some things over this course, working with all these different industries, working with so many different organizations. We've learned together with you that your job is complicated. But before we get much more into the product stuff, let me digress for a minute. Take a moment to illustrate some things before we move on. I'll share something a little bit personal here, something a little more visual. I love Calvin and Hobbes. I'm unashamed to talk about it anytime you want to talk about it. If you're not familiar, Calvin and Hobbes is a comic strip that ran from 1985 to 1995. It was illustrated and written by a man named Bill Watterson. He's retired now, but I think he's brilliant. He's able to talk about the human experience through the absurdity of an ornery 7-year-old boy and his imaginary tiger. I still read these pretty often. I've got a whole stack of the books right next to me. They originally ran in what things called newspapers. They aren't in the newspaper anymore. But I love Calvin and Hobbes, and to get into this topic, I actually want to share a strip with you. And I'm going to walk through that strip, and in the interest of not leaving a bunch of dead air, I'll go ahead and read it out loud. Here we go. The center snaps the ball to the quarterback. No, he doesn't. He doesn't? No. Secretly, he's the quarterback for the other team. He keeps the ball. A traitor. Calvin breaks for the goal. Wheeze at the 30, the 20, the 10. Nobody can catch him. Nobody wants to. You're running toward your own goal. Huh? When I learned you were a spy, I switched goals. This is your goal, and mine's hidden. Hidden? You'll never find it in a million years. I don't need to find it. As a traitor to your team, crossing my goal counts as crossing your goal. Ah, you might think so. In fact, I know so. But the place I hid my goal is right on top of your goal, so the points will go to me. But the fact is, I'm really a double agent. I'm on your team after all, which means you'll lose points if I cross your goal. Ha ha. But I'm a traitor too, so I'm really on your team. I want you to cross my goal. The points will go to your team, which is really my team. That would be true if I were a football player. You mean I'm actually a badminton player disguised as a double agent football player. And I'm secretly a volleyball, croquet, polo player. Sooner or later, all our games turn into Calvin ball. And Hobbes wants to make sure there's no cheating. So Calvin and Hobbes is arguably the best or the worst sport of all time. The only rule in Calvin ball is that you can't play it the same way twice. And that's illustrated by the fact that Hobbes says the score is Q to 12, but in other strips you'll see that the score is things like oogie to boogie. So that brings us full circle to what I really want to talk about today. From our experience, leading a product is a lot like Calvin ball. You know the goal is to win, but the game's always changing. Things are always shifting around you. So now let's leave Calvin behind and let's talk a little bit about the role itself. Like I said, we know your job is complicated. Day to day, you're moving from project stand-ups, stakeholder meetings, market research, design reviews, probably breaking up a couple arguments here and there and trying to prioritize work for the team all along. Things are also constantly changing. As you go from group to group, you find they use different language and they do things differently. Especially if you go from company to company, you'll learn the vernacular is very different. And that's because the software and the web has matured quite a bit, but it's not that old yet. It hasn't standardized quite as much as maybe some older industries. There's really one thing you know, that folks are relying on you for return on investment. And your actual title may be product manager, product owner, senior engineer, marketing director, UX designer, can be all sorts of things. But regardless of what your email signature says, you're playing a critical role and you're accountable for your organization's digital product. Now let's take a second to talk about titles, because I know that many of you have some really crystallized views of different titles, especially titles like product manager, product owner, things like that. They have very specific definitions depending on your context. We've learned that there is no one right answer. There's a lot of variety out there. So for the purpose of this conversation today, I'm going to avoid most common industry titles for the most part. I'm going to be focusing on the role and not the title. All right? So at least for today, if the accountability for a digital product rests on your shoulders, you're a product champion. That's what we're going to call you today. So congratulations. If you don't feel like you've won a lot in life, you're a champion now. And essentially, what I mean by this, what we've learned, is this generally means that you're accountable to identify and refine product goals, consolidate and distill stakeholder needs, and gather resources and prioritize work for the product team. In a nutshell, that's being a product champion. And that's mostly what we're going to focus on today. But before we get into a lot of the ins and outs of the daily work, I want to put all of this into context. Because a champion's strengths and experience do play a lot into how they carry out the role. But the context of an organization's culture significantly influences what's required of the role as well. Larger organizations generally have more numerous, specialized roles, while smaller organizations have general roles that wear a lot of hats. Some organizations value innovation, while some require more control. The product champion is the conduit between strategy and delivery. Consider the people, processes, and the conversations involved in moving from strategy to a delivered digital product. Your place in that ecosystem provides significant context for your role. So I want to walk through some basic scenarios here, and we'll start by talking about some baseline assumptions. In every case, someone needs to provide strategic direction for a product, and someone needs to provide tactical leadership to deliver that product. Now, strategic product leadership includes gathering business insights from stakeholders of various types, doing research, to create objectives. Tactical product leadership focuses on collaborating with the business to further refine those objectives and then delivers. So let's talk about some different scenarios, because depending on your organizational context, your role as a product champion and the title that you have may lean more toward the strategic, the tactical, or include both. So here's the first scenario we'll talk about. In this scenario, there's a strategic leader representing the business, such as a marketing lead. And as product champion, you collaborate closely with the marketing lead to refine objectives and then work with the product team to determine tactics on how to deliver a product that achieves those objectives. So this is you as a product champion if you're in more of a tactical lead role. I know lots of you might be in this camp. So the next scenario then is a champion as a strategic lead. In this scenario, there's a tactical leader who oversees delivery. Maybe they are called lead engineer or something like that. As a product champion focused on strategy, you collaborate directly with them to ship new features and products. Looks something like this. The third scenario is if your organization has a more condensed structure. In this case, you're a product champion that's doing a little bit of both. With a more condensed structure of your organization, your role as a champion may actually encompass both strategic and tactical responsibilities. In this case, you're balancing business needs and delivery needs. We've seen the champion role in this third scenario be efficient and successful. We've seen it be wildly stressed out and unsuccessful, and everything in between. This largely depends on the complexity of the product and the number of stakeholders. If you're in this role and stressed, my fellow Sparkboxer, Julie, who's super smart, she has some advice on UX that can really help. She's going to be speaking a little bit later. Ultimately, as a product champion, it's important to understand your organizational context. If you're accountable for a product, you must establish who is responsible for the strategic objectives and tactical delivery of the product, both for yourself and for those around you. Perhaps most importantly, you must establish the collaborative practices that govern the space between strategic and tactical. Because software projects rarely fail due to technical problems, but they often fail due to people problems. So if it hasn't already been done, you must do the hard work of establishing these responsibilities in your unique context. It could be some of the most important work that you do. Take a minute here, get a drink of water. All right, now let's talk about what you need as a product champion. Now, I know you don't really need us to tell you what you're aiming for. A better product, more profitability, happier users, an effective team, sustainable work-life balance, right? You already know what you want. But based on our experience, here's what you need as a product champion to achieve your goals. For starters, you need to be empowered with authority. You need to have established relationships with strategic and tactical collaborators. And you need to have access to a platform for gathering resources. These basic needs provide the foundation for a champion to be successful. This is the job in a nutshell. This foundation is essential because it's organizational recognition and it's empowerment of the role that allows you to really deliver. The second thing I'm going to mention that you need as a product champion. You need your product to provide value to the business by delivering value to the user. User needs come first. Products cannot thrive on business stakeholder feedback alone. I want to say that again. Your product won't be successful if you're just relying on business stakeholder feedback. If your organization doesn't have a strong culture of market research, user research, analytics, things like that, you will have to advocate for growth in this area. And you're going to have to educate others on their value. In the meantime, while you work on that, there are lean ways to gather user research to provide strategic direction. Julie will talk about some of those things. We have some of those things on our blog as well. You could also just work with us. But before we stop talking about this point, I do want to make kind of a secondary point about user needs and business needs. User needs and business stakeholder needs do not need to be at odds with one another. They shouldn't be at odds with one another. If they are, it's likely due to a lack of education in one or both directions. If user needs are being communicated well, the business is likely to recognize the mutual opportunity for value and come into alignment with them. Likewise, if business needs are being communicated well, then the product team is better equipped to research and test the right things which align the product with both user and business needs. So overall, what I'm trying to say is that if you have good communication between the user needs and business needs, they're likely to come into better alignment with one another. They don't have to be at odds with one another. The third point I'd like to make about what we've seen you need as a product champion. You need your product team to have access to all that's required to meet the product goals. This is where the whole platform for gathering resources comes into play that I mentioned earlier. If you don't have what you need to go get what's needed. This includes funding, training, people. Your team needs the appropriate balance of skill sets to deliver. And that can be either part of the permanent product team or through access to subject matter experts. That doesn't particularly matter, but you do need to have a balance of skill sets to really deliver well. So on that topic of gathering the right resources that you need, at least when it comes to the right people, I want to talk a little bit about gathering the right talent. Obviously, there's no formula for a perfect team. Every product, every problem set are different. Every organization is different. But in our experience, you must have strong representation in at least a few of these major areas that I'm going to mention. So at the risk of telling you something you already know, I do want to share 5 major areas that we do believe are necessary for a product team to be successful. So I'll go over these really quickly before we move on to some other blockers and things that product teams run into. The first major area of talent that we think every product team needs is user experience. Now, not all UX professionals are the same. They may lean towards research, information architecture, usability testing, design, or a number of other disciplines. It's not one size fits all. UX is required to develop strategy and facilitate its translation to a tactical plan, though, for the product team, whether they're a permanent team member or an outside subject matter expert. Or it might even be you as the product champion. That's not uncommon. The second major area that I'd like to highlight is user interface design. And I come from a design background, so I can kind of make the joke that it's coloring with crayons, but no offense intended. UI designers are the visual translators typically, building on UX strategy, who ensure that the presentation of your product is accessible, usable, delightful, and on brand. I should mention, though, that while this discipline has been focused primarily on visuals in the past, it is growing to include other interfaces, such as audio. And that's all due to the rise in non-screen devices and accessibility for those who are visually impaired. The next area of necessary talent for your team that I'd like to highlight is strong front-end development. Modern front-end web development is far more complex than in previous decades. The discipline carries a heavy responsibility with an emphasis on responsive web design, accessibility, progressive enhancement, performance, design system thinking. In order to deliver quality web products, your team must possess these skills, either in specialized front-end team members or in full-stack engineers with really strong front-end skills. And the fourth area of talent that I'd like to highlight is software architecture. Because in the end, you're shipping code. And that requires significant engineering experience to architect a series of intersecting systems to move that product code through source control, end-to-end testing, data management, and deployment to all the proper environments. Many organizations are shipping product code alongside other overlapping digital products and business systems. Every team needs an architect to create and maintain a big picture technical strategy. Before I move on to the last area of team talent that I wanted to highlight, I do want to do a call out for Catherine, who's going to speak a little bit later in this UnConference. She's going to talk a little bit more about what you as a product champion can do to work with the developers and engineers on your team. Lastly, I want to talk about team management as an area of talent that you do need for your team. Now, Sparkbox is all about self-organizing teams. Strong professionals do not need micromanagement. However, high-performing teams do require leadership and facilitation. Often this role is played by you, the product champion. However, depending on workload and organizational complexity, team management might also be shared by other leaders, such as project managers, agile professionals, UX or UI designers, or other engineers. All right, let's get to some of the fun stuff. Let's talk about overcoming blockers and false starts. If you've already been in the champion role, you likely have a list as long as your arm, filled with challenges, roadblocks, or false starts that you've experienced. At Sparkbox, we've lived these experiences right alongside you in a variety of industries and organizational structures like I've already shared. Some hardships were already waiting for you on day one. Sometimes even before you attend your first stand-up or your first planning meeting. Others present themselves later as you make your way. But I want to go through some common challenges that we've seen now, and I'll break them up into a couple different groups. All right, the first group of issues that I want to talk about are issues for your boss. I'm not talking about issues with your boss, I'm talking about issues for your boss. Now, these are issues that affect your role as a product champion, but they might be outside your jurisdiction. Generally, these are problem situations that your boss needs to address ahead of time to create an environment where success is possible. If you're a champion and these issues weren't addressed ahead of time, you need to humbly but urgently work with your boss to address these concerns. First one I'll talk about is when more than one person believes they are the ultimate champion of the product. This is a messy situation. When one person believes they've been tasked to own a product and they run up against others that believe it's their role, you know what happens. It turns into a turf war. It gets political. It hurts long-term collaboration. And it rarely ends with a better product. Accountability rests with one person. The proper authority figure, such as your boss, needs to name that person publicly. That's a theme. We'll come back to that. The second issue for your boss that I'll talk about is when no one believes they're the product champion. It's kind of the opposite of the first. Generally, we've seen that this is a situation where the business knows they need a product and they hire a team to build it without naming clear leadership. And in that leadership vacuum, team members might step in to fill parts of the champion role, but without a holistic perspective or clear accountability. This has mixed results. Often, the accountability then rolls up the food chain to a boss that's too busy and too far from the day-to-day to provide proper leadership. In any case, the product needs a clear, intentional champion, named by business leadership. That's the theme of really both of these. More than one person believing they're the champion, or no one believing they are the champion. In the end, accountability rests with one clearly identified person. That person needs to be identified. So let's do a little story time on this topic, these issues for your boss that I was talking about. Imagine a scene where a champion is empowered and capable, right? They're in your company, you see them over there. The team isn't perfect, but they're delivering value. Day in, day out, the champion is meeting with stakeholders, making judgment calls, clearing up confusion, unblocking the team. Then one day, that champion's gone. Maybe they moved over to another product, or they moved to another company. And the powers that be did not name a new champion. What happens then? Right? At first, no one feels accountable. We just said a product champion is accountable. When no one feels accountable, chaos ensues. What happens? Right? What happens when nobody is ultimately accountable? What makes it into the product is essentially whatever the most opinionated person wants. Or maybe it's the most enabled person, whoever holds the key to the deployment process, perhaps. That's what happens when you don't really have a clear champion. Alternatively, multiple people could end up believing they're now the champion, right? Maybe they work in different silos. Maybe their bosses are even encouraging them to step up and take ownership. What happens? Politics start overnight. You can imagine how that goes. And this is what I mean when I said that this hurts collaboration long term. Because later on, a champion is probably going to be named. And what are they going to have to do? They're going to be untangling messes. They're going to be mending fences. Because all those folks who were maybe vying for leadership over the product, they didn't go away. They're still there. So the product champion now has to mend those fences and untangle those messes. So in the end, that's what this main point is all about. Accountability rests with one clearly identified person. It doesn't mean you're not taking feedback and working with a lot of leaders. It just means that one person does need to be named, and that's often an issue for your boss to resolve. All right. Enough with the story time. Let's move on to issues for you. There are innumerable hurdles that you'll have to clear in your role, but I just want to highlight a few significant challenges that we've seen that will probably come up, if they haven't already, as you guide your product and your team towards success. The first one I'll mention is when you have accountability, but others don't recognize your authority. I know this is hard. It's actually hard for me to say, because I know there's many of you that are really feeling this one. It hurts when you know you're going to have to give an account for the product's success, but the stakeholders or the team aren't responding to your direction for the product. So what do? Remember that a champion must be a great communicator, a great facilitator, an arbiter. Before you go and bring in your boss to emphasize your positional power, do all you can to personally gain trust and respect. Do that on your own first. Go to your stakeholders and team, explain your role, and talk to them about how you can help them, how you can help the users and the overall product. If you're able to do this on your own personally, your earned authority will be far more effective in the long term than your positional power. The second issue that I'd like to highlight is when you have objectives, but not proper resources. You don't need an MBA to make a business case. And a business case is exactly what you need to provide in this situation. Maybe start by estimating the effort it'll take to deliver high priority features given your current team and tools. Then clearly illustrate to the business, the stakeholders who may be the key to gaining more resources, illustrate to them how additional resources will allow for more desirable results. Interpret desirable results however you will, whether that be cheaper, better, faster. Making this business case doesn't always mean more resources will be available, but it does put you in the best position to have at least shared expectations with your stakeholders if you've made these points to them. Now, I actually have a great client example for this whole issue of when you have clear objectives, but you don't have proper resources. We've worked with Gap Inc. for a number of years. Our product champion there was a UX designer, and she had clear objectives to create a design system, because Gap is the perfect environment for needing a design system. They have multiple brands. They have Athleta, Old Navy, Banana Republic, others. So design systems serving all of those e-commerce platforms could have a lot of value. But at the beginning, things were really tough. She didn't have a lot of resources. So in order to go and start to gather resources, she worked on gathering buy-in, showing the value that would come from a design system. She pulled examples of component disparity so she could show those to stakeholders. For example, pulling buttons from all the different areas of the site and showing how different they were, showing how much inefficiency there was at the time in the site. In the meantime, while she was working with stakeholders, we worked together and we built lean. We didn't have alignment yet with the engineering team, for example, on what framework we'd be working in. So we kept it simple. We focused on HTML and CSS components for a long time. We did things like figuring out our versioning, creating releases of the design system so eventually it could be consumed once we had alignment with engineering. We went after small wins, things like font changes. One of our early wins was being able to swap out a font for a brand, something that used to take a really long time, but with the design system in its infancy, could make that change happen actually pretty quickly. And as value is shown, these wins led to more resources and buy-in. And today, Gap's design system has grown and it's really flourishing as a result. But a lot of that credit goes to that product champion who went out and did the slow, hard work of getting more resources by getting more buy-in. The third issue that I'd like to highlight is when your stakeholders want features, but your product needs so much more. And this is kind of an everyday issue. It really never really goes away. Remember, anything that you or your team provides is part of the product. I'll say that again. Anything that you provide is part of the product. That includes documentation, training, support for customers or marketing teams. These aren't features, but they are requests from the business. Development, environment maintenance, tooling, refactoring, reduction of technical debt are also part of a product's lifecycle. These aren't features, but a significant part of your job is balancing feature work with chores and non-feature work. But my recommendation is that you'll save yourself some pain if you can help all your stakeholders understand the value and a balance of all these things. A champion must educate stakeholders on the work and the time that's required, not just in feature work, but in all the chores and non-feature work as well. The last issue that I'd like to highlight is probably not a surprise. You don't know everything. I'm not trying to offend anybody. I think you already know this. This is likely the most significant issue that you're going to face. There are so many unknowns in software. You need to get comfortable knowing that you do not know everything about your own product, and you never will. There are features that you don't even know you need yet. There are risks you haven't dreamed of. There are dragons that are going to rear their head in your legacy code. You're never going to see them coming. For your own peace of mind, accept that these unknowns exist, and they always will. And for the peace of mind of your stakeholders, you need to educate them about this reality as well. If you don't, you're going to find yourself defending against situations you never could have foreseen. I want to give an example on this one as well. And it's not just an excuse to get one last comic strip in there. If you're in a non-agile environment and you're trying to account for all the unknowns, you're playing with fire. This is a big part of where the whole agile movement came from. the recognition that waterfall doesn't work. And what I mean by that is to discover all of the unknowns, make them known up front and account for that. It's playing with fire. Trying to figure out all scope and make known all the issues ahead of time is hard. It's maybe impossible, at least to do it well. So if you're in this kind of non-agile environment that really values this kind of waterfall mentality of trying to identify or thinking that you're identifying everything up front, you're likely trying to create budgets around scope that assumes you know everything when you don't. What happens, and you might have seen this already, is your budget's hard to hit. Compromises, sometimes not suitable ones, have to be made. Deadlines are missed. Budgets are blown. Now, if you're in an agile environment, that doesn't mean you don't have any of these issues. It might help with some of them. But you should remember that your business stakeholders are still likely to forget the fact that unknowns are always impacting the work. So like I said before, bring them into that conversation. Help them understand. The unknowns in your work are always impacting your budgets, your timelines, and your scope. Empowered, delivering value, and fully capable. These are the qualities that we've seen lead to successful product teams, and by extension, successful product champions. Now, there are going to be days when it still feels like you're playing Calvin ball, where the rules keep changing and surprises pop up around every corner, and it seems like everyone is playing their own game. But your team and your product aren't going to get there overnight, so be persistent. Make your own rules. Aim for these qualities of a successful team. Because if you don't have a goal to aim for, you can't win. So go be a champion.